travel isn't just about destinations, it's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show.
Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Personal Finance is brought to you by Indway Risk Services, because the right insurance starts with a conversation. It starts with Hello Indway. Well, Warren, this evening we're going to be talking about when you should buy your home and when you should rent it. Warren, good evening. Before we start, let me just get something out the way, because I'm sure it's going to come up. I have bought my home. When I say bought, I am paying money to the bank for it every month and still will for some time. Just so you know where I stand on this side of the equation. So don't be surprised if I nudge things along in that direction.
Thank you for your full disclosure, Stephen. I appreciate it. I mean, I think it's such a tricky topic because there is a huge amount of emotion involved in this, and not that we should discount the emotion. I think there is tremendous value in recognizing that a lot of us find stability in owning a home, and that stability has a real value. And so, you know, sometimes you don't make the very best spreadsheet financial decision, but you make the best decision for yourself and your families. How's that for sitting on the edge?
Well, yes. I mean, the other thing is, and I don't know if it's the case in other countries, I think it may be, but the generations that came before us were very much buy property. And you can understand why, because in their time, the price of property rarely only went up.
We have a massive fixation on property as South Africans. And what's interesting is we seem to export that fascination when we go overseas. So you see a lot of South Africans all around the world, and it's very normal for them to be on the property ladder as fast as they possibly can once they get to wherever they decide to move to. And very often they'll be strange in that country. They'll be unusual from the perspective that people in those countries, especially in the north, will never own a home. They'll rent for decades at a time, and they'll find it strange that people come from South Africa and buy. And I think that you know, our parents and grandparents would have said, you're crazy to pay off a landlord's mortgage. Why are you doing that? You should always own the place you stay in, and doing anything else is silly. And I think that's a view that certainly, you know, 1, 2, and 3 generations ago, that they would have felt that very strongly. And anybody saying something different would have had a hard time, and probably, you know, would have been up there with believing in UFOs if you said, I'm happy to rent for the rest of my life.
Okay, let's get into it a little bit. Some of the reasons not to, and some of them are to do with the cost of ownership, which I can confirm for you is higher than you might think.
I'm sorry to laugh. It's understanding that when you buy a home, most of us, if we buy a house, we might not buy a freestanding house in a suburb. We might end up buying an apartment in a body corporate, and especially for new buyers, first-time buyers in a home in a body corporate, you might be thinking, well, that's fine. I don't have to worry about maintenance at all. I'm going to buy the house or the apartment, and I'm going to pay a monthly levy to the body corporate, and my electricity and my water, and then everything's fine. That's not true. What we need to understand is that you know, whether you own a freestanding house or you own an apartment, there is always maintenance. You know, whether it's the inside of the place, which needs to be repainted and maintained on a regular basis, or when you need to look at something like a special levy, because if you're in an apartment building, unfortunately that needs to get repainted as well, and that money doesn't come from the sky, that comes from you as the owner. And a lot of body corporates don't budget for this. So what happens is every 5 or 8 or 10 years, you suddenly get notification after an AGM that you are now paying a lot more money every month for your levies because you have a special levy. And so those kinds of costs tend to accumulate. And it's crazy when people move into a house. Let's just talk about a freestanding house. Even if it's a great house and you were clever in the way that you bought, it's just funny how things tend to fall apart. You could be in for 6 months and the geyser bursts. So the ownership costs are much more than you would think. And in contrast with a tenant, for example, when you go and rent a place, all of that is the landlord's issue. All you've got to do is pay your rent, make sure that you pay the electricity and the water, and everything else that goes wrong is an email, a WhatsApp, or a phone call away, and you then get an unhappy landlord who has to deal with that.
I mean, the other thing, and we really mustn't forget this, is that the cost of transacting in property, and it's easy to forget this, is actually very high. Buying and selling there are lots of costs that come along with it that are sort of government costs. You can't avoid them.
You're paying, just to kind of list them, without giving amounts for everything. But you're going to pay a form of tax called a transfer duty, and unless you're buying a low value property which falls below a threshold, you're going to pay the bank if you've got a bond. Almost all of us are going to have a bond, so you pay them for registering the bond on your property. You pay the lawyers for conveyancing fees. You pay bank costs over and above the bond registration. Then you pay administration fees. So for a home, and I just did a quick calculation, for a 5 million rand house, those costs all in could be somewhere around 420 to 480,000 rand, and that's not going to improve the value of the house. In other words, it's not like you've just painted the place or put in new built-in cupboards or something. That's gone. That money is just a sunk cost. And it doesn't add a cent to the mortgage that you now have and all the other things that you're going to do. So transaction costs are very high. And important to remember that if you want to sell the property one day, you're most likely going to pay an agent to sell the property for you. And nowadays, that cost is somewhere around 2.5% to 5% of the value of the property. And if it's an expensive property and you've done well out of the capital growth of the place, you most likely might pay additional capital gains taxes as well. So going into a property and selling the property one day, it's really expensive.
How important is time in the house then? If you're going to have this conversation, you're going to decide what you're going to do, how important is the amount of time you're going to spend in the house?
Well, I think let's take that. Just say 480,000 rand as a transaction charge. The longer the number of years that you stay in the property, the better. Because if you stayed in the house for 3 years and then you sold it, you're only getting 3 years worth of benefit for your 480,000 rands worth of costs that you've paid just to go in. And then you're going to pay a whole lot of money on the way out again to the estate agent. So what you want to do is limit the amount of transaction costs that you're going to pay. And the best way to do that is stay in the property for a very long period of time. And so spreading out those initial costs and the exit costs, over a decade or two would be a much better idea because, then your costs are just much lower. But the second thing is now we get into the difference between renting versus owning. When you rent a place, the landlord is going to give you an escalation on that rent every year. In other words, they're going to say to you, you're paying 10,000 rand a month now. In a year's time with inflation, you might be paying whatever it is, 10,000 plus another 1,000 or another 2,000. And that will happen year after year after year. Your rent will never flatline unless you're in an area which is going down, and most likely then you'll want to move. If you contrast that with someone who's buying a house, and if they've got a mortgage or a home loan, what happens there is they have a rate of interest, and as long as the interest rate stays the same, their monthly repayments into that home loan will remain the same. And on the calculations I've done, and I've done this lots of times, but I know it's boring, but I do it for fun sometimes. It seems to me that on all of these calculations, if you stay in the house for a period of 8 years or longer, then it starts to work in your favor to be an owner and not a tenant. But if you're going to rotate properties more frequently, then, and let's say every 3 to 5 years, I can't really come up with a good case for being an owner. It doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so then under these circumstances, when is renting the sort of right choice? When does it make sense to be that person who's renting and sort of contributing to the owner's mortgage?
Let's think about a few life stages. So the first is we start our working career, and if you are like me, your working career means that all you can afford is not even a one-bedroom place. You can afford something which is a bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom, and all in one place. And so you stay there for a period of time, and then hopefully if the career goes well, you get a bit of an increase, you can afford a bit more rent, and so you move into a bigger place. And if you're going to do that in, let's say, 3-year stages, and that seems to be the norm, then it makes no sense to buy any of the first few properties because you're going to be moving so frequently. And so there, at that stage of life, being a tenant makes a lot of sense. The second stage of life is maybe later on when you've got the family home, potentially you've had children, they've left the house, and you're starting to consider what to do next. I think a lot of the time there you want to potentially change at least suburbs, if not cities. And if that's the case, then don't buy the place on the other side straight away when you sell the family home. Then you need to be a tenant again, because you need to figure out where you want to be, what's the ideal size of place that you want to live in. And certainly later in life, I find older people want smaller houses. They don't want the maintenance hassles that Stephen's going through right now. What they want is a small garden or potentially no garden, and not much day-to-day work on the property. In which case, being a tenant for a period of time until you figured all that out, I think makes a lot of sense. And then maybe because this is the kind of modern world of work, a lot of people don't have a lot of stability in the way that they earn a salary. Not a lot of people are just getting a fairly comfortable, predictable salary. They're in the gig economy. And if you're in the gig economy where your salary and your package might be entirely variable, then owning a home becomes highly risky unless you really have a lot of money. Because what happens if you go through a 3 or 6 month period where your pickings are slim and you can't afford the mortgage? You can't go to the bank and say, look, it's tough times at the moment, just give me a bit of a break, I'll come back to you when I'm ready. The bank's going to say you owe us money, and if eventually, if we don't get paid, we're going to be forced to go to court and sell your property. And so that kind of stress when you're in an insecure kind of earning environment, I think is far too risky for people to commit to a property. So to me, those are kind of key points here. But time is the big one. I think that's the huge determining factor. The shorter the time, the shorter, the more weight in favor of renting.
We're going to come back to this, and I'm going to give Warren my argument for why I think you should buy in just a moment, and let's see how he responds. It's 11 minutes now to 8 the time.
The Money Show.
Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Warren Ingram, of course, with us, and the question tonight is when should you buy and when should you rent? Warren, let me give you a scenario and tell you what I think the advantages are and why I think home ownership is still so important for so many people, and hopefully not just me. If, for example, you're in your early 30s, you could buy a house on, say, a 20-year mortgage. As you pay off the mortgage, you've bought the house for X. The rate of inflation prices will go up all the time, but the price that you paid for your house still remains at X. That's what you're paying back. And so over time, there should be, and what should happen in a market where house prices are going up and where things are moving normally, the amount of your income that you're paying for accommodation goes down, if you see what I mean. So your bond, what you're paying every month, goes up and down according to interest rate decisions, but inflation continues up all the time. The price of goods always goes up. They never really come down. So that's the one thing. The second thing I would say is if you buy a house in your early 30s and you live in it until you say early 60s, which I'm sure is a scenario that's happened in many cases, you've probably paid it off within the first 20 years. So for 10 years, you're living rent-free. You're not living cost-free, but you're probably living rent-free. And then the other thing I would add to it is that if you get ahead of your bond, you can use it to finance other things. It's the cheapest finance there is. If you want to buy a car or something, that's a very good way to do it. Those would be my sort of arguments in favor.
I really like the last one. And I think that's it's also a fantastic emergency fund when you've paid off extra money into your home loan, and you know where you can access money in an emergency. And as you say, then for buying a car, easily the best rate you're going to pay, unless you're incredibly lucky. So I like that role that a mortgage can play in your life. The first one around rising property prices. I have some emotional scar tissue from having been a homeowner in Joburg for a period of 9 years, and I did pay the home loan off as fast as I possibly could, and was really enjoying life, living in a paid off home and enjoying just having to pay rates, etc. However, when it came time to sell that house, I had to sell it at a price below what I paid for it, Stephen, and that's the fallacy of the assumption that house prices only go up. Unfortunately, that's not true. So if it was, we would be okay. I think over a very long period of time, we know that house prices tend to track inflation. That's true, but the house prices move in such a long cycle that you could find, as we're seeing now in Joburg specifically, that house prices. I heard a story the other day of someone who's just bought a home from a person at the same price that they paid for the house in 2007 in a prime area in the northern suburbs. And to me, that's really tough because when you take into account the value of money, the 2007 price relative to today's price, that's going backwards at a rapid rate. So I'm concerned that we believe that maybe the one thing I'd say is when everybody's terribly afraid of buying a house in a particular city, and there is a lot of negativity. If you have the ability to see through that as a cycle, then you might be able to buy the house at a very low price, and then you participate in a very nice recovery. And that's value investing at its best. Buying when everyone else is selling. I think that could work, Stephen. But gee, I think if we believe that house prices just go up because we read the papers and we see what happens on the Atlantic seaboard, that could catch us out.
Don't you still get 10 years rent-free, though, if you live in a house for 30 years?
You do. I think it's a fair point. So I think it's, and maybe the thing we really should, also focus on is a lot of people simply can't live with the uncertainty of being a tenant, and having that locked in kind of anchor in their lives is critical to them. And maybe the other argument as well in favor of renting, because I'm a tenant now, so I'm on the other side of the equation from you. But one of the things about for me being a tenant is there is a day when the landlord could just say, listen, I'm selling, or there's huge demand in the area in which you live, and I'm pushing that price up, that rental price at a lot more than inflation. And if you don't like it when the contract ends, unfortunately, you need to move out. And I think that's a instability that a lot of people won't enjoy, and it will make them make incorrect financial decisions in other parts of their lives. So I think it's, I know I'm sitting on the fence a little bit, but I think we can make good financial decisions which don't fit in the spreadsheet. So I'm not saying that you've made the wrong choice in being a buyer, but I think the kind of just get on the hamster wheel and buy the property because that's what's always been done. For me, that's a really poor way of making decisions now. We need to be very considered in this, and understanding that, whatever you do, the home ownership, it's going to be expensive. It is a cost, for your life. It's going to be an expensive item to own, especially where property ownership costs are rising much faster than inflation. And where we see that is refuse collection, those kinds of things. The small little taxes that we think are not big items are going up sometimes at 15 or 20% a year. And that's going to catch people out, in the months and years ahead.
So, what you really want to do is try and work out over time what the cost of accommodation is over 30 or 40 years. And you've then got to sort of spreadsheet that and try and work it out from there. It's quite complex to do. I mean, most of us don't know how many children we're going to have, but that's actually the way to do it, is to be quite as rational as that is. That's what you've got to try and do.
Yeah, and often, it's good to bring out the children. I think parents of young children, when they make the decision to choose a school for those kids, that could be a decision that locks them into a particular area for 7 years or 7+5, depending on whether you want them to stay in the same area for both junior and high school. And that's a great time to be a buyer of a property, because you know exactly where you're going to be for that time, and you've got a great reason to be there, other than just preference. So to me, then buying almost irrespective of the price makes sense. And schools and educational institutions are often a great anchor for properties in general. If you look at the areas around very good Model C or the old Model C schools all around the country, those areas tend to stay fairly high value areas, because parents need to be close to get those kids into those schools. And I think that's a very good argument for property ownership as well.
Warren Ingram, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate it. Co-founder of Galileo Capital, and need I remind you, a certified financial planner.